This episode of Radcast Outdoors is brought to you by PK Lures, Bow Spider, and High Mountain Seasonings.
Fish on! Hey, Radcast is on!
Hunting, fishing, and everything in between. This is Radcast Outdoors. Here are David Merrill and Patrick Edwards.
Well, hello and welcome out there, all you Radcasters. I'm glad you're back here on the show. Today we will have to excuse Patrick as he has some prior obligations, but you get to listen to me. But fortunately for you, it's not just going to be me talking to you all day. We are going to let you know we've been doing some giveaways and some really cool stuff on Radcast Outdoors. So follow us on the social medias and wherever you're listening to this podcast. If you want to help it grow, sharing, subscribing, telling your friends, we need everybody we can get because Patrick and I really want to keep her going. We really like doing this. So with no further ado, today I have Mike Arnold. He is a distinguished research professor at the University of Georgia. He has over 150 published articles, a passion for conservation, science, hunting, and wildlife. Welcome to the show, Mike.
Hey, thank you so much, David. Thank you for having me on here.
No, I'm glad we got hooked up. You actually have another book coming out here pretty quick.
Yeah, actually it launched today, believe it or not. So on the 12th, it launched in of July. It's called Bringing Back the Lions, and it has a really long secondary title, International Hunters, Local Tribespeople, and the Miraculous Rescue of a Doomed Ecosystem in Mozambique. That's a mouthful, but bringingbackthelions.com is where folks can go to actually find it on our website and order it, or just take a look around at it because they can get a little bit of a blurb about it and see what it's about. But it's been a wonderful time putting it together. But Winston Churchill once said, and he wrote a lot more books than I have. This is number 5 for me, but he wrote a lot of them. And he said, they start out basically as something you love, and then by the end, they're a dragon you want to slaughter and throw out into the public because you're so tired of them.
I feel very similar with our YouTube filming. By the time the film actually premieres and airs and people can sit down and watch it, I never want to see it again.
Well, someone asked me about it. I was listening. We're going to have an audiobook version of this as well. There's an ebook, and then, we have the paperback that came out today. And someone asked me, that must be great to listen to it. And I said, man, I'm listening to my own writing. I'm really, really tired of this right now. So, but I do think it's turned out well. We've had a lot of good feedback from folks. So.
Well, just a quick start, with a background on how did you, I love the books here. I'm excited to read it, and everybody should be searching it, checking it out, Bringing Back the Lions. We'll get into the book a little more here in a minute, but I want to go way, way back, like as far back as you can remember. How'd you get your start in the outdoors and hunting?
Oh, boy, it was my dad. And I knew, you and I had, talked about the fact that we were going to talk about my dad anyway. But Daddy was a hunter and a fisherman, and he loved being outdoors. We raised quarter horses. We did all sorts of stuff, and we lived in the country. But I killed my first big game animal, and I can still, to this day, consider it my number one trophy. And this is going to sound weird because I'm in my office and I'm looking at my leopard that I got in Namibia. I'm looking at my mountain lion I got in Wyoming. I'm looking at a kudu. I'm looking at all sorts of mounts. But my number one trophy, and will always be my number one trophy, was a little doe white-tailed deer from San Saba, Texas. And I got her when I was 5 years old. And I was using a little 243. I had to crawl the stock. Daddy had taught me how to shoot, how to be safe, about conservation. And I shot off of his shoulder. I think that's the reason Daddy was deaf in that one ear, to be perfectly honest with you, because I had to do that every time. But she was my first big game animal, and she still is the one that I remember the most, which is, I'm 65 this year. So it's been 60 years since I took her, and So that's how I got started. Was Daddy took us hunting, took my brother and I hunting, and he took us out fishing. He took us. I didn't catch the fishing bug like I did the hunting bug. I'll just tell you the truth. But that's how we got out there. Was Daddy, took us with him, and he took us really young, obviously.
So
and his heart.
I'm gonna go off script just a little bit there, and similar kindred spirit. You come to Bow Spider headquarters, and there's I wouldn't call them trophies. I'd call them totems, right? Memorabilia from some of my most exotic expedition hunts tripping around the globe, right? Because I don't like the negative connotation that's the only reason we go. And we'll get into the conservation piece, but as you mentioned those, I've got some of the similar ones, right? And I'll tell you, there's a photo of my oldest when he was 3 with his arm around my neck, and he's holding a little knife, right? And we shot a doe antelope. But to this day, it was just him and I. We went out, and he got to watch from the pickup. His dad snuck up and got this antelope, and it was, he come running across the field. I was 200 yards from the truck when we got it, hunting some alfalfa country, and the excitement and the joy and the just the interaction in nature and with one another it's indescribable, right? We all, either poets or artists or YouTubers or authors, try and touch on what that means to us of getting to go out with our dad or getting to go out with our son and enjoy these times outdoors. And until you actually experience it, I can't put it into words very well. Can you?
I can't either. And the added part of my story was that it was the last day. It's one of those, we always wanted on the last day, right, when we were writing about it to build up the suspense. But I had not gotten a deer on this. I guess we were there for about a week. And everybody in camp, and these were folks I didn't know, okay, but everybody in the deer camp put their guns down and drove that doe to Daddy and me. They said no one, and a lot of them didn't have deer yet. And they said no one gets to shoot except this little 5-year-old boy, if anyone shoots on this drive. And to me, that also speaks volumes to how passionate and compassionate hunters are, especially towards young folks getting into that company of folks who are hunting. So, it's a sweet memory. That's one I hope I never lose, that memory. But, that's how I got. That was a long-winded explanation, but that Daddy was the one that got me into it.
So how'd you get into writing? We've got the what started the hunting, and I'm sure there's a lot of stories in between that doe and now, but how'd you get into writing?
Similarly, we were a family, Mama and Daddy, both my parents. You can tell I'm from the South calling them Mama and Daddy, but both of my parents were readers. They read voraciously. They read different things from one another. My mom read a lot of novels. My dad really focused on shooting and hunting and outdoors kinds of, camping literature and books and things like that, magazines. And so I grew up around that, and I fell in love with reading. And from there, for some reason, David, at the earliest age, once again, I remember sitting at an Underwood typewriter. I'm not even going to try to explain what that is to your younger audience, but an Underwood typewriter, and sat there and wrote stories.
There's no back bar or delete. It's it's put a new piece of paper in that for the younger readers, right?
Oh, that's exactly it. So, and I wasn't very good at it. So, so that's. I wanted to express what I'd seen out in nature. That's what I wrote about, were things outdoors. I still remember that. And I wanted to get them into sports afield and outdoor life and field and stream, the big three. I wanted to get them into those magazines. And I didn't back then. I have now, but I didn't back then, obviously. But that's how I got started writing, was back then, was doing that. And then, as I got trained as a scientist, I've written a lot of science articles. I've written 4 science textbooks, and then this 5th book which is not a science textbook. And so I love that. I really, really, really enjoy that creative aspect and reliving, what I've seen, I guess.
So did your work on the textbooks, your passion for the outdoors, and kind of your college degree culminate in bringing this book to life, bringing back the lions?
It really did, because the book is really a book about how there's a restoration of this entire region in Mozambique through trophy hunting, through the money from trophy hunters, both men and women, and from donors who are trophy hunters and hunters. And so it's about that, but it's also about the conservation of whole ecosystems and the restoration of ecosystems like marshes and swamps and sand forests and all these sorts of things that I'm familiar with the biology of. And then it's also about the animals and the plants and that sort of thing, which I've done a lot of research on since, I started in about 1975, actually, as a freshman undergraduate student doing research and field work. And so it really has brought it together. But I tell you, it was a very different animal, no pun intended, to write that book, because it's a story-driven book. It's not a science book. It's a story-driven book about people and about the animals and about the place and about the local folks their lives being regenerated and restored through the trophy hunters' dollars. And so it's a real different book, and one that I took a lot of joy actually putting together. But yes, it all feeds into that. It really did to allow me to be able to write that book.
Awesome. I'm kind of pins and needles waiting, and I mean, now today we can go order it, get it, and actually get to read it and share it. So I'm really looking forward to it, and I could probably have a conversation discussion for the next 5 hours about conservation, the success stories in Africa. And there's one point I'll get to in a minute in the dichotomy of kind of the wolf restoration ecosystem here in the GYE and the, elephant lion restoration in Mozambique, Zimbabwe, South Africa, Namibia. But before we get there too far, I do want to recognize one of our sponsors that we definitely couldn't have our show without, and it's PK Lures. PK Lures, I've been getting to go fishing with Patrick here and there, and that's definitely not my main forte. Now, Dad grew up, he was the fish nut. He still is the fish nut, but both his boys are much bigger hunters than they ever will be fishermen. Not saying I haven't done or won't go, but if you are going to be going fishing, freshwater, saltwater, any of the trout species, any of the smallmouth species, it doesn't matter if you're northern United States, southern United States, PK Lure has a lure that's going to target the fish you're looking for. So check them out at pklures.com. So back to my point on there is and I prefaced it earlier about trophies on the wall versus totems, right? And
yes,
we could really get into many hours and hours of discussion on the North American conservation model and how it's been slightly adapted but still implemented. There's only two places in the world that game species have increased in the 21st century, and it's the North American continent and South Africa, right? But there's some people out there who, say, well, the Yellowstone GYE, since the wolves were reintroduced, they kicked the ungulates off the stream so that the beavers could make better beaver dams so that the floods quit stopping. So now the willows have been restored and the deer and elk are now thriving and flourishing. And actually, the hard scientific data numbers will tell you exactly the opposite's happening. We have a predator pit, and the ungulate population is in free fall. And it has continued to be in free fall. I mean, very specifically, the moose and it's not just predators, but the moose are down to 200 total moose in the Jackson Hole drainage, and they had a 1% calf recruitment. Well, 10% is needed just to maintain the herd and 15-20% to grow. So there's that film out there that suggests that trophy hunting is bad and that unchecked regulation and unchecked wildlife will just manage itself. And while there's some truth to that, it's pretty much a big lie. And I'd like you to maybe tell us a little bit about, because I don't have the numbers and data and scientific information, but when I went to Africa the first time, it was night and day. There was two countries, similar size. I want to say like Zimbabwe and Mozambique. One banned trophy elephant hunting and one implemented only trophy elephant hunting. They both are similar size geographically, similar size human population, and one has over 40,000 elephants and one has 2,000 elephants. And that growth from 1970 something till now is 100% attributed to hunters paying for their South American conservation model. Am I very far off on that statement?
No, you're not at all. And I think that what we have to understand, the North American model, like you say, it's based around an excise tax on everything that hunters and fisher folks do, and especially hunters and shooters, because it's on firearms and ammunition and everything else that goes along with that. So, that's the Pittman-Robertson Act that came in the 30s. And of course, as you know, the manufacturers asked for this excise tax, actually went to the federal government and said, we need conservation of wildlife or we're going to lose everything. And so they asked and got an excise tax put on. I mean, it was sizable, 30%. And so, this last year they had a record
disbursement,
distribution of the money was $1.5 billion, and that goes straight into the state funds. It is allocated for four things, and it's all conservation based, buying land, doing research to figure out how to keep wildlife and wild lands around in North America. Okay, so that's our model. And it works great and has been working wonderfully. And of course, the reason that this last year was a banner year, was a record year for dumping it into the state, that money into the state's coffers, was because of we've had a lot of firearms sales in this country because of concerns and things like that. So we can set that to the side. In Africa, like you said, that you have to have a value, okay? And you have to have a value on wildlife that is above the value of if they have some kind of a trophy a commodity that someone wants, like tusks on an elephant, that a poacher would want, or that overseas folks are going to want the ivory, or they're going to want the rhino horn, or whatever, or the meat in the local markets. It has to have a value that allows conservation, because it's only going to be conserved if the locals see it as a value above protein for them. In fact, in the Bantu language, this was pointed out to me by Ivan Carter, who's a famous conservationist over there, African conservationist. Ivan said, look, in the Bantu language, which is the root language for most of these places and most of these dialects and languages, he said, meat and animal are the same word. He said that tells you that people see it as a food source. And he said, there's nothing wrong with that. He said, that's what you guys did in North America. You ate everything with protein when you went east to west.
Oh,
That's why we lost our... Yeah, go ahead.
The conservation model has been proven, a dozen times, right? And most recently, with the restoration of the grizzly bears in the GYE, that should be hailed as something to celebrate and be like, hey, bears are coming off the endangered species list, off the threatened list, and they're going on to the huntable, manageable list. And we can look at bison, turkey, white-tailed deer, elk, and the list goes on. But if you go look at the story of the bison, of the turkey, of the white-tailed deer, of the elk, they were gone. And by gone, meat market hunting, you see some of those old pictures of the towers of bison skulls that they just... And what's sad is back then, that wasn't even trophy hunting, that was market hunting, and they were just shipping the hides. They were leaving the meat to rot, Yep.
So, and that's what we have to understand is that in Africa, you have developing countries for the most part. South Africa is more developed, obviously, than most of the countries around the continent. In fact, probably the most developed, I would say, medical care and all that sort of thing. But it's also the most developed, as you reflected on, in terms of the game hunting and the game farming. It's not necessarily all fenced or anything like that, obviously, but it is very well developed that way. It's a big part of their economy. So they have value, and so the animals have exploded in numbers, all the different game animals, but it also means that the land is protected. And so the songbirds are protected, and the insects are protected, and the amphibians are protected.
And that's something, yeah, I mean, Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation totes that as their totem all the time, right? And they're like, this many million acres protected. And I want to say, it was Ted Nugent that maybe said this, that, in today's society, day and age, and you alluded to it, that animal has to pay for its habitat. And how does that animal pay for its habitat? And that's just plain and simple. And it might sound, I don't know, a little bit barbarian or archaic or rude, but simply put, if that elk cannot afford to pay for its habitat, it's going to be a housing subdivision. It's going to get that 3,000 acre ranch. It's going to get subdivided into 30 acre parcels, and elk can't tolerate that. They can't live there. Yeah, you get a little bit of Estes Park where there's a few roaming around, but that's not the way it's supposed to be.
No, and I think that the other part of this is that we need to communicate is that it protects wildlands. In Africa, it protects people and their livelihood. They're fed, they're educated, they are, they're given health, medical treatment. I mean, in the book that we've discussed that I just put out, all of those are talked about. How did it also restore and regenerate people's lives? But the other part of this is that people think, I believe that there's a huge number of folks who are not anti-hunting. My wife does not hunt, okay? She just goes on my safaris with me and is my videographer and photographer, but she doesn't hunt. She doesn't have any desire to hunt. She's not against hunting, but she's a non-hunter. I think there's a lot of folks out there who are non-hunters. We need to point out to them, look, the older males are what are taken. If you allow the areas to be poached or to be market hunted, bushmeat hunted, whatever we want to call it, young animals, females, everything disappears. With trophy hunting, the older animals, in terms of in Africans especially, the older males are targeted, and only a very small proportion. To give you an example, in Mozambique, where I was hunting, they have 3,000 stable. They had 30 when they started. Okay, they had 30 stable antelope in 1994. Through the hunters' dollars and conservation, they now have 3,000 stable antelopes. The only place that is where you have this population of this very glamorous species that's exploding in numbers, in terms of the only places you see that is where it's protected by hunting. Well, they have 3,000 stable antelopes there, and 20 antelopes are taken each year. Something like 20 permits are given out, and that's it. Well, that's why and those are only the bulls, and only older bulls will be taken. So you're not, in terms of, as a biologist, I'm looking at that going, this is a perfect way to conserve organisms, because you pour that money back in there, you're conserving, you're making sure that the take of that population is not high enough to push it down. It's not like wolves in Yellowstone that are eating everything and are not ever going, the argument is they're not going to cull them. Well, they're going to eat everything. I don't know what to tell you. If you don't keep the balance in that kind of a situation, you're going to get it out of balance. And it is. It's just flat out of balance with the wolves. And, I don't know. People, would argue, well, we can't kill them. I mean, they're wolves. Some people will argue that. And you say, well, then you're going to lose these herbivores out of this system until the wolves eat it all the way down. And then the wolves are going to spread out or starve to death.
I mean,
there's your choice.
Just look at the symbiotic relationship between bobcats and rabbits. I mean, that rabbit has a 7-year cyclical up and down. They just do. whether there's strict hunting in place or not. They just do. Rabbits kind of, well, are prolific. They eat all their food. Their population crashes. And it's about 2 years later, the bobcat population crashes. And those two population curves just mirror each other forever. And so there is that symbiosis of prey-predator-food relation. And there's Ranella says it, and I do agree with it, is, charismatic megafauna. All of a sudden we go from an ugly turkey or an ugly carp, which is in the ecosystem, or a rat or a mouse, up to, a grizzly bear or a wolf. And it's like, oh, we got to treat these two species differently. Not really. I mean, they need habitat, food, water, they need to breed. One thing you kind of alluded to was, one thing I know scientifically with trophy hunting is by only taking those older past breeding age bulls, that genetic competition within the herd creates the most disease resilient and the healthiest young. So if you have take bull elk, for example, you have a large mature herd bull doing the breeding, all those calves, he's going to be more successful the first time breeding. So those calves are going to drop a month earlier in the season. So they're going to be a month older going into winter, which puts them in better body condition to survive that first year. That's a fact.
Yep. You're exactly right. And that is something that we need to really, emphasize, that when we go out, we have certain permits that we can take a cow, an elk, or we can take a raghorn or a spike bull or whatever, but those are few and far between. And so the emphasis on taking the older animals, whether it's in Africa, whether it's here, is always an excellent model, because like you said, it really leads to genetic enrichment, because you replace that bull before it has, or that adult, before he has the time to breed with his own young or closely related young. I'll give you a story that was told to me about, because one of the things that's in my new book is about cheetah reintroduction in this area. So I was talking to this person who is actually Vincent Vandermeer, is the person who does the cheetah reintroductions all over the world. Now, he hunts, but he also understands, conservation really, really well. And so anyway, they were introducing cheetahs into Malawi years ago, and they had two males. One ended up being dominant, as you would expect. One was not. They didn't have a lot of cheetahs put in there, and they were going to put more in. Well, their population exploded, and only one male was producing the cubs. And when his first generation of cubs were almost to the point where he would start breeding with them, they became obviously very concerned, because they didn't want that kind of breeding going on, that inbreeding going on, because of disease and that sort of thing, and genetic maladies. And I said to him, so did he end up breeding with his cubs? And he said, nope. And I said, well, what happened? He said, a croc got him. Said, oh, well, that's one way of removing him from the population. He said, look, we didn't want to lose him. We would have darted him and gotten him out of there. But he said a crocodile took him, and he said then the subservient male, was able then to move into that position. And he said we have genetic enrichment in that population. Well, it's the same way for hunters. As we take out the older individuals, like you said, we're going to end up with that kind of genetic enrichment, because the less dominant are going to move into that dominance position. And that's what we want, in nature. That's exactly what we want.
So what happens to the African, because I've talked to, I just got done going to Africa, and we podcasted earlier about it, and there'll be a YouTube film from, because a lot of people think that us hunters are just the Disneyland redneck hicks that don't have any kind of education or understanding, and we just go around and slaughter animals. But what happens to specifically South Africa's conservation model if hunters quit coming? And let's be honest, 80% of the hunters are from North America.
Well, I mean, you can ask you just talk to the South Africans, and that's in the government as well as, hunters and non-hunters. I mean, they recognize that if we stop coming, that land, those animals will have no value. and they will be removed. They will be eliminated, and they'll turn the land back over to the way it was, say, prior to 1980, and for the large, when they started their game farming. And what that means is that they will turn it into agricultural land of a different sort, and they will raise Angora goats or whatever the heck, cattle, whatever fits wherever they are. But that's what will happen. And the only place that you will have any wildlife will be in small pockets where they're not able to, maybe, in an area where you just, they're not going to hunt them out or whatever, but they're still going to have to support themselves off of something, which means that they'll introduce agricultural species like goats and cattle, et cetera. The only place you'll have wild species then will be in fenced parks. And those are increasingly damaged areas like Kruger and places like that. They're just under so much pressure because now they're not allowed, for example, to remove elephants. And the elephants are just turning those areas into sites that look like a bomb crater. And because politically, they're not allowed to shoot them, and they can't, someone said, well, why don't they just, dart them and get them out? It's people don't understand the cost, the economic cost of moving something like an elephant. And so the bottom line is there's just not the money there. Once again, they're not supporting themselves. And
I've said that several times, whether you're a birder or a photographer or a nature observer, go shake a hand of a hunter and say thank you, because without that hunter, that mallard duck doesn't have a marsh, that elephant doesn't have a park, and that grizzly bear doesn't have ungulates to eat. And that's a fact. It
is exactly a fact. And what was pointed out to me when I was doing research for the book too, and one of my buddies over there, who's a wildlife veteran in Mozambique, is a wildlife veterinarian, and one of the chapters on him is on him, and he is a non-hunter. Okay, and he is he's not an anti-hunter, but he is a non-hunter. And I said to him, if you were given, because he has an MOU with the Mozambique government for doing all of their transplants and human wildlife conflict things, that his organization does everything. While I was there, he was darting elephants and all sorts of different things so we could put collars on them and do various kinds of research projects there in Mozambique. But anyway, I asked Zhao, I said, if you were given, you're a non-hunter, right? And he said, yes. I said, if you were given the power, if the government in Mozambique, and they could actually do this because of his standing, if they came to you and said, should we change and turn all of the hunting concessions into parks for photographic use only, would you recommend that? I asked him that. I just wanted to hear what he said. And he said it would be a disaster. And I was intrigued, and I said, why? Why would it be a disaster? He said, Mike, what you need to do is get in a helicopter and fly over any economically viable photographic area that brings in enough photographic tourists from around the world, and most of them are going to be from North America probably, and look at the landscape. He said it is a desert because they drain all the water from the water tables to get the animals to pans to certain areas so that photographers can get their photographs. And he said it's interlaced with roads to move that many people around, and it's interspersed with huge housing complexes or hotels for housing, because he said you have to have that many people. He said, as opposed to a hunting concession like we were in, Catata 11, where we were, where he said they want very few roads so that there's more habitat for hunting. And he said they don't have to bring in very many people because they spend so much. So he said, I would never, he said, if I was going to do anything, I would do the opposite to what you just suggested. And he's a non-hunter. He said, I have no desire to ever hunt. But he recognizes the value of hunting concessions for conservation of both the habitat and all of the associated animals, not just those that we hunt.
So if somebody wanted to get into starting to write and do some field observations, what would, because I'm sure they go hand in hand. You're as a hunter, you're always observing everything. You're basically the next level up from the photographer or the poet. You're out there, you're observing nature, but you're connecting in a deeper way. But to get your start in writing, what's some advice you'd give somebody that's thinking about writing a book?
Well, if they're thinking of writing a book on natural areas or biology or hunting or fishing, you just, you have to feel it, right? I mean, you and I both know this, because you guys film so much. I just don't do this. I don't do filming well in the sense of technically, but to capture that in the writing, I had to be in Mozambique. So use the book as an example that just came out. I had to be in Mozambique for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and be around the animals and the ecosystems and hunt, do some hunting. Now I did more interviews and with folks and got into people's lives, and so I could tell stories than I did hunting, but it still, get out there. You have to get out there into nature. You have to be smelling the smells. You have to be seeing the sights. You have to be listening and hearing to be able to put it down on paper. I would also recommend that people start in terms of writing. Start by writing articles, and it's in terms of I'm a freelancer, and it was described to me by another freelancer and a buddy of mine. Well, actually, Craig Boddington described it to me, who's got a quote on my book on the front cover. But anyway, Craig is real well known as a hunter, obviously, and won the Weatherby Award and all this sort of stuff. And he said, look, it's the hardest life in the world at one level, but he said it's the most blessed life in the world at another level. And he said, I can't believe I get to do this. And I think that that's the thing for folks is if you have that passion, get out there, hunt, shoot, fish, whatever you're doing, and write about it. And write the feelings and write the smells and sights and the funny things and the crazy things and sometimes dangerous things, I suppose, that there is an inherent danger in some of what we do. I think that's overblown at times, but still, there are times when one of the chapters was, in this book is about a leopard collaring, and we got charged by a huge male. He was turned by the dogs at 4 feet away from us. That's probably the closest I've gotten to being whacked by something out in nature. So you write about it. You write about that. You write and say, what did it feel like? What did it sound like? What did it, So I think that my major thing is whatever you're going to write about, you got to experience it, I think, especially if we're talking about outdoor writing. You really have to get out there.
And there's something about that connection with nature. I've read and watched The Man-Eaters of Tosavo several times. Tosavo, how do you say it? It's about the British colonies putting a railroad bridge and colonizing Africa, and a couple lions just turned into man-eaters and ate everybody. But, now Hollywood dramatized it a little more than it probably was. But when I was in Africa this last go-around chasing Cape Buffalo, we heard a leopard. And, some of these, I guess, wives' tales or stories that get exaggerated. Well, if you're there firsthand, they were scary enough. And I tell you that on my Cape Buffalo hunt, I was ready to be out of there.
I was too. I wondered about your story. I know this is supposed to be a podcast where I'm yakking a lot. I am, but boy, I wanted to hear how in the world you went after a Cape Buffalo with a bow. Whew.
I met up with Dries Weiser Safaris in South Africa, and he's one of a handful that are there. Dries Sr. started in 1977, and before that he was professionally hunting, I want to say, in Botswana maybe. They were leaving for 6 months a year to go. He was a professional hunter guide, and they kind of said, hey, let's start raising animals here and start a ranch at home. And then his son's like, well, I only want to do bow hunting. And so I've met Dries the last couple of years, and with COVID, with the reduction in hunters, they're needing conservationist hunters to come over there. You look at the impact of I don't even want to say it, but Cecil the lion with the dentist, and the ban on the CITES and lion hunting, and the outcome of that was they brought in the army and shot 200 lions and let them lie, right?
Yeah.
And at $50,000 a lion, that was a lot of conservation money that just got burned in a pile. So, but I spoke with Dries. I went to Africa 9 years ago on a Safari Club International banquet hunt that I purchased. And that was just a plains game, 100% in the blind. And I wanted to go do spot and stock. I mean, very simply, the first time I went, I was more of a, I guess, luggage passenger, more just of kind of a nature observer, not a nature engager. When I shot my first kudu, 10 guys showed up, loaded it up, hauled it off to the skinning shed. We went the other direction, went hunting for different critters, and got back to camp at night. And as a public land DIY hunter, I do all my own elk, all my own bison, all my own moose, and we hike miles in and take every ounce of that meat goes in a backpack on my back down to the truck, and we bring it home. We butcher it ourselves, because when you're talking 8, 9, 10, 11 tags a year, the butcher is too expensive per pound for us. So in our household, if you're having dinner at my house, 9 times out of 10, it's going to be elk, antelope, or mule deer. We're very fortunate where we live. But back to Africa, I told him, I said, if I'm coming, and this is a great intro, my company needs spot and stock. I said, it doesn't do me any good, and I'm not the person to sit in a blind. I've forced myself as I've grown up to be more patient, but as a young man, I was the kid that was 3 ridges away, still chasing the elk that was running away from me. So he said if I wanted to come do spot and stock, that I needed to come in May. And if I came this year, he'd give me a little bit of a discount. So I hopped on a plane 6 weeks later, and I spent that next 6 weeks scrounging to build a bow arrow combo that would be sufficient. The broadhead ended up not getting any penetration, whether it's the broadhead or my shot or whatever. You guys will see it on film. But no, I just wanted to go back. And why did I want to go back? I mean, there's a lot of people I've talked to. I'd never go to Africa. I'd never hunt a high fence. And if you fly over that area, you're not really hunting a high fence. Dries, while I was there, traded a sable bull. He had not traded, but on his auction had bought a sable bull and had it delivered and turned it loose in his breeding herd, right? And they are breeding for the absolute biggest, because they're selling either a live animal or a dead animal, but either way, that bull only contributes to the herd if he's huge. If he's small, they're taking him out, and they're going to let those breeders so that they have really strong genetics, and that's going to secure that species indefinitely. So it took us 7 days to spot and stock at Cape Buffalo. I honestly thought it was going to be easier than it was, and I drew my bow back 3 times under 40 yards, shooting a almost 80-pound bow, 77-pound bow with a 675 grain arrow, 200 grain broadhead, and I couldn't shoot much past 40, 50 yards. It just 240 feet a second is a slow, heavy arrow. So the last evening, we set up in a likely ambush spot and had 2 bulls come by, and I took a shot, and then it was subsequently followed up with a rifle 5 times and a dog and a lot of chaotic running and people moving in and out. It got very dynamic very quickly. But go ahead.
I'm looking forward to, I wanted to hear. I mean, the area that I hunted in Mozambique, now Mozambique banned bow and arrow hunting bow hunting for dangerous game. I believe it was just dangerous game not that long ago. It was dangerous game, but they're trying to get it back on the books. It was just a political boo-boo, to be honest with you. But they in this area, up until when I went last year, they had been bow hunting Cape Buffalo. And they have huge numbers of Cape Buffalo there, and it's all spot and stock. So.
And why bow hunting? Because in that week of hunting, I got within rifle range 100 times. I only got within bow range 3 times. And when you're 28 yards from an animal and pulling a string back. You can see my pin is steady and my bow's steady, and I was being a little bit of ice veins, but once that arrow flew, I was like, get me out of here. This is, and anybody that's going to go do it, I would highly suggest have an exit strategy, right? You don't want to have that whole herd whipping their tails and throwing their heads up in the air and be coming at them and poke one, because you might have the whole herd come after you. So lone bulls are your friend if you're going to go bow hunt Cape Buffalo.
There you go.
So that does give us into our next sponsor real quick, and that is Bow Spider. And, I started this company because I had a passion for the outdoors and for hunting. And I'll be honest with you, Mike, I could go start a foundation dirt work company and make more money, right? I could go in some sort of product R&D into the IT tech center and make more money. But I don't get to share my passion with the world and be who I am. So thanks, Bow Spider, for supporting the podcast and for supporting this, and obviously paying for us to go Cape Buffalo hunting, because that was awesome.
There you go.
So in your mind, between hunting in North America and hunting in Africa, what are some of the differences and what are some of the similarities?
Similarities are, start with those, is that I find that hunters, whether here or in Africa, are just a neat community of folks. For the most part, they are, because they're passionate and right where they want to be and having just such a great time. They're very giving. They're very welcoming. And they love to hear stories. We all tell stories to one another, and we just sit around the campfire, whether or not it's in Wyoming or in Mozambique, and we chat about the day's events, and we just love retelling and reliving those. And so I think that the hunters, in that sense, the community, are very similar, regardless of where they're from. In Mozambique, we had German hunters in camp. We had South Africans. We had Mozambique. We had, from all over the world, actually, French, Netherlands, etc. So it wasn't just that they were all from the U.S. The difference is, I think the major difference, I suspect you found this too, is that when you do anything in Africa, if you're with Africans, you do it as a group. And, there are multiple folks there. So you're not going to, as a visitor especially, you're not going to be out without your pH. But you're also not going to be out without your pH trackers, in most places, game guards, and that sort of thing. So Africans are used to doing everything in groups. And it's basically a family unit for you while you're there, your pH, your trackers, etc. Over here, we tend to not do that, right? We tend to go out by ourselves, or we tend to go out maybe with a buddy, but then we're also hunting by ourselves. Sometimes we have a guide, but it's just going to be one person. And so that group dynamic in Africa, I find fun, but very different, And the other thing, and I'm no good at tracking, okay, I'll just tell you that. Game spotting and game tracking in Africa are really developed into an art form as far as I can tell. They do amazing things. I have pretty good eyes. I can spot stuff once I get an image in mind, but tracking, no way. No way. And you may be a great tracker because you're a bow hunter. I just don't track worth a flip. But I have never seen anyone be able to track over here as well as I've watched trackers in Africa do it. Looking at bent grasses and stuff like that.
Yeah, Mike, before I went over there, I would consider myself advanced, to say the least, right? And once I got over there and got introduced to this time we were with Ben. And you hit it hit the nail right on the head. Was we had a cameraman, we had 2 PHs for dangerous game. They each had rifles. We had the tracker and then the truck driver, right? So there's 5 or 6 of us rolling around all day chasing this buffalo. And my favorite part was going back to the campfire because my dad and brother were in camp and there was another hunter in camp. So we'd all share the day's stories or tell old stories or just enjoy the camaraderie and smiles. And, I'm sitting on the ground one day for lunch because we got to the point I said, I'm not going back to the lodge for lunch and a massage. I'm here to hunt, right? Give me a cold sack lunch and let's go hunt. Well, I'm sitting on the ground right next to my tracker and the driver and the PH, and we're just having, a tribalistic huddle, eat our cold lunch sack and go, and the joking and the laughing and the camaraderie. In 7 days, I created lifelong friends, right? They're kindred spirits. That's why I could create lifelong friends in 7 days, is because of that. We share that passion and similarity. I don't care what the creature is. I don't care what the continent name is. If you're a hunter, you're a hunter, period.
Mm-hmm. And the camaraderie is built up around the events, and whether we get the animal or not. And that's here or over there. That's the amazing thing, I think, some folks, is that, you pay that big amount of money. Well, you might not have gotten the Cape buffalo, but you still paid the money. Maybe you wouldn't pay the trophy fee, but, people are perplexed by that. And they say, hey, you spend all this money, well, you always get it, right? And I'm like, no, not at all. We fail as often as we, in a lot of, especially over here when you're, say, doing public land hunts for elk, for heaven's sakes. We could, success rate is not guaranteed, but we love being out there, pursuing the game and trying to outwit it, and we get beaten. And at times. But
if you disconnect, you get a chance to connect. And that's just, I can't put it more simply.
Absolutely.
So tell me about your dad and some of the hunting and conservation that was passed down to you. What was some of the things you picked up early from him?
Well, that we were always really careful about limits. We followed the law. As a bloodthirsty 5-year-old, obviously, or 8-year-old, or 9-year-old, or 10-year-old, I would have loved to have sometimes. I would have loved to have, just shot everything. And Daddy was a stickler on saying, there are limits for reasons. We want to have the birds, quail, dove, whatever ducks, whatever the heck we're hunting, deer. We want to have them for next year, and we want to have them for next season. And we want to be able to see them and hear the quail calling to us and all this in our backyard during the off season. He said, we're not, you can't shoot everything. So he taught me conservation without actually ever using that term. He never used the term conservation that I remember, but he was, that's exactly what he was passing on. In terms of hunting, we weren't that wealthy at all. And so we lived off of, you said about your family, we lived off of white-tailed deer. We lived off of ducks. We lived off of mourning dove. And we lived off of quail sometimes. The population there was up and down because of raccoons and stuff like that, and skunks and things like that, and really decimated ground birds. So we, ground nesting birds. But we lived off of wild game. We didn't eat a lot of pork or beef or whatever, just simply because we didn't have a lot of money to do that. So he also taught me that the utilization and the love of process. I know this sounds crazy, but I have, in my garage right here, next to my office, I have my hook and hanger for processing my own deer. He taught me how to process deer. And of course, the smaller stuff too, the quail and the ducks and everything else. And I really fell in love with all the way from the field to the freezer. And he really transmitted that as well. That love of, it's not just going out and shooting something. It's presenting it and then cooking it. I also like to cook, and cooking it for your family. And, that chain really means a lot to me. I get a real charge out of being able to go out and hunt, get something, and see it on the table later on. That just brings me a lot of joy. So he didn't just teach us to shoot. He didn't just teach us to be marksmen at whatever level we are, my brother and myself in particular. But he taught us, these skills that are associated with it, so that everything was utilized, everything was conserved. And I just can't speak enough about what he did in that way.
And we're not going to get too deep into it, but I imagine there's a strong connection between that respect for life that was ingrained in you at a young age, right? Just these basic principles that hadn't been scientifically proven or studied or researched. Just, hey, the limits are set here, we're doing it this way, and you've taken a life, you're going to do everything you can to utilize as much of that resource that you just harvested, right?
Yep.
And I think
I absolutely.
I think the young people of today need to get back, put the video games down and get back into the woods. I think that's what our society is missing, is that disconnect to reconnect.
I believe getting outside, and that it is a struggle, for parents too. I mean, we struggled with it. It's sure easy to give your kid a handheld video game or a phone or whatever that's going to babysit for you, and I think that's tragedy, because then your kids are missing out on, and children are missing out on what you and I grew up with, which was getting outdoors and just being blown away by what's out there. Not even necessarily hunting, but just being blown away by nature. And, seeing this stuff, it just always captivates me wherever I am.
So, as these outdoor activities, we've had a good little bit of recruitment via COVID, and it's the one activity that didn't get shut down. But as we have this exponential increase in potential in participation, do you see any challenges to conservation hunting, in the future as we have this changing landscape in the outdoor industry?
We do have a changing landscape, and I think we have to communicate the passion for and the compassion for wildlands and wildlife, and really explain how hunting benefits what you and I have been talking about. Why do we have white-tailed deer in Georgia? They were extinct, okay, and they started reintroducing them in the 1930s. Now we have, I don't know what the current estimate is, but it'd be 1.5 million or whatever white-tailed deer. Why do we have turkeys back? Why do we have, state-run conservation efforts? And why is that there? And we need to keep emphasizing that, like you have done already during this podcast, that it's because of hunters. It's because of hunters and shooters and people buying fishing licenses, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think that the challenges, I do see challenges, but I think there are so many folks out there who I believe are not anti-hunting and who can understand the truth in that argument. We don't have to make up the data. The data are there. And we can just point to species after species after species that are back simply because of hunting, and selective hunting, not market hunting, and not poaching, and not doing, whatever. And so I think that, will there be challenges? Yeah, there could be challenges to saying, well, we want to close this area to hunting so we can just have folks who are going to go hike, allow folks to go hiking. And we have to push back against that. And I can tell you the states will push back against that, because they will say, wait a second, these are being conserved because of hunting. They're WMAs or whatever y'all have in Wyoming, public land. They're being conserved because of hunting, not because of hikers. Now, I love backpacking. I'll just tell you. I mean, I've got my backpacking stuff. Just close to me in a closet. I love backpacking. I've done it since I was 18 years old. And I love putting a pack on and just heading out into the woods. But I can tell you that I'm not the one supporting those woods when I'm doing that. The money that I put into those backpacks, et cetera, are not going for the conservation of those species. They're just not. I'm not arguing against backpacking and hiking and things like that. Not at all. I'm just saying that's not why we have them. And people just need to understand that.
Oh, Mike, and I would fully attest and agree with you. I went all the way through the scouting program and went all the way up through Eagle Scouts. And, part of that last year was as a venture going on the 50 miler, right? We backpacked, and I love backpacking. And I got like 7 backpacks, and that's my bread and butter is a DIY backpack hunt, right? I'm there doing the same things you would be doing as a backpacker, but once I get to the top of that summit and take that picture of, hey, look, I was here, then I pull out my high-powered binoculars and look around and go, how are the animals utilizing this landscape, and where are they, and what are they doing, and why are they doing? And I'm so much more connected with that specific landscape than any hiker will ever be, and I can't really explain it, and there's a dichotomy there of, how can I, as a lover of nature, harvest nature, right? And we've touched on several reasons, but I would say I know elk more intimately than the biggest elk lover you've ever met. Why? Because I eat, sleep, and breathe elk hunting, and I just ever since I was a little young boy reading the articles in the back Outdoor Life and Field Fish and Stream, right? I mean, we got Fur Fishing Game, we got Field and Stream, we got Outdoor Life. And it was Saturday morning when cartoons were off, the very first, mid-90s, we had some hunting shows on TV, and they weren't very good. And I got kind of mad when Bill Dance with Fishing came on. I was like, what? That's my hunting show for the week? Okay, well, next week. I'm like, I grew up with my dad in the Pacific Northwest. I saw enough fishing for the rest of 2 people's lives. Right? But and you said it is, an admirer and just, there's something that gets ingrained in a hunter chasing whatever species. And so that leads me to a question. If you had to pick one species and one weapon to only pursue the rest of your life, what would it be?
Oh, it's easy for me. I don't get to do it very often. I sure don't do it the way you do it. But I would hunt elk, and I would use a custom built pre-war Mauser rifle. It's in .35 Whelen improved, and it was a custom built rifle that my dad gave to me. I could not believe he gave it to me. It's the action's probably 100 years old now, or a little bit more, and I actually used it to take a Cape buffalo, the only one I've ever shot. But I've harvested a couple of elk with it. It's a wonderful, just a beautiful rifle too. But I would hunt elk, and the reason I would hunt elk, number one, I love to eat them. But the reason I would hunt elk is I fell in love, probably the way you did as a kid. The paintings I would see, the illustrations I would see in hunting magazines or Jack O'Connor books or whatever. And then when I got to hunt them, and I was in the aspens or I was in the pines or I was in whatever, but in the West, I grew up in West Texas, though I've lived in Georgia since '89, and probably I suspect I'll die here, but I love the West. And so I would hunt elk as long as my legs would allow me to get up the mountains, I guess. And that's what I would do. And I would enjoy eating the elk too.
So if you had to prepare one piece of wild game, what's the recipe? How would you procure it? How would you cook it? What is it going to be? What am I eating at your house for dinner?
Well, you would eat, now I in our questionnaire, I mentioned moose, and I love moose, but I've never hunted them, believe it or not. A buddy of mine keeps giving me moose that he hunts, and I love that. But at my house, if I was allowed to hunt elk, like I want to be able to get out there and hunt elk, you would end up with a fillet, and you would probably have backstrap that is opened up and filleted, and then I am Southern as Southern can be, and I would chicken fry that. I would probably pound a little bit. I would chicken fry. It would be very simple, salt, pepper, and I would chicken fry that. I would add mashed potatoes and cream gravy. You didn't ask me this part. And probably some English peas, because that's the way Mama used to cook our venison, and that's the kind of meal she would make, and I just fell in love with it. But I love elk the best.
Well, I know you being down there from the south, you've got lots of spices and seasonings to put on that prepared elk backstrap. But one of our sponsors is High Mountain Seasoning, and whether you're doing fish or game or just store-bought burger, they have such a wide selection, and they also have a whole bunch of tools for the guy that's doing their own game prep, whether you're making jerky or summer sausage kits or even bacon or ham. So, big shout out to High Mountain Seasoning. They're right here in town, and they're sold globally. They are a great product. Patrick and I, a lot of people ask, you really use that stuff? I'm like, I used it before, and now I use it even more, right? So whether you're making pepperoni sticks, the ones that we've talked about before several times is we do a lot of jerky. We get enough animals here now at the old Bow Spider household that if you're having steak, we're probably having backstrap. When I first started hunting in Oregon, and I'll throw them under the bus another 100 times on this podcast, and lots of guys know why, they're mismanaging their conservation very badly. But we make a lot of front shoulders are now just pretty much hamburger, right? That's just the way it is. We'll pull some roasts off, we'll backstraps for steaks, and then we do a lot of burger because we have a lot of meatloaf and spaghetti and meatballs. But the kids really like the ground jerky shooter sticks, and the recipe is so simple. You mix the seasonings and the spices to proportion, you chill it for 24 hours. They basically have like a big caulk gun with a wide tip. You squirt it on wax paper. You can either put it in a smoker or in the oven, and those kids will eat pounds and pounds and pounds of that. Now, me, on the other hand, I like the whole muscle jerky. I like to slice a big rump roast into thin slices, sprinkle the same stuff on it, in the refrigerator 24 hours, and then smoke it whole. But I like to chew on it a little more than the kids do.
Well, that's okay. That's good. Dad doesn't have to compete with them then.
Yeah. So I know the other listeners out there, the little bit of fishing you do, what kind of fish are you going to go catch, and what kind of fish are you going to cook and eat?
I lived in Australia for 6 years. I saw that, we were talking about that question, and so I'm going to be biased towards ocean fish right now. And so I would, if I was going to get to choose, or when I get to choose, I get red snapper, and I stuff it full of wild rice mix, and I grill it. And I tell you what, I love that. So now, growing up, we ate everything from the little, what we called catfish, but the channel cat that we had, we ate bluegills, we ate smallmouth, largemouth bass. And once again, everything in the Arnold household then was fried. So I'm not sure, we had lots of red eye gravy with all of our venison and stuff. But yeah, with the fish, it was always deep fried. So that's what we grew up on. But I tell you what, if I had my druthers and they said you can only eat fish every night, I could probably eat red snapper every night. So that one's a little bit weird, but probably for folks.
Well, I love the quote here on your release, and it says, a small group of people, a little money, and a big idea that can save the globe, right? And having hunted, next on the list is Argentina and New Zealand for me. I want to do stag and I want to do dove, but there might be some fishing in both those places because New Zealand has some trout, and there's Dorado in Argentina that I want to go chase. So, but
absolutely,
this idea, and we've kind of beat around the bush the whole time, but if you're a hunter, you need to be inviting your non-hunting friends and neighbors, and just take them to elk camp, take them to duck camp, take them on the photo safari to Africa with you, because I think that's there's one end of the spectrum that is adamantly never going to hunt, and I've heard them say very plainly that they'd rather the government come in and kill 99 animals than one hunter take one, and they don't understand, and they never will. They'll never be reasoned with. You could show them all the science and data and talk all day until you're blue in the face, and they're not going to listen to you. But I think by taking a kid or even an adult on scent hunter and say, well, you don't have to hunt. You can just come photo safari and recreate and hang out. I mean, I know Dries Weiser does a great job of husband-wife teams where the wife is a more of a photographer. They'll take you on their wild game side that hasn't seen any hunting pressure and won't see any hunting pressure. And I mean, they're much more photogenic on that side of the ranch. So that's definitely, there's an aspect there that even though it's quote unquote supporting hunting, like you mentioned before, going into Kruger, you might as well go into Disney World or Disneyland, and it's just not fun. You go on one of these hunting concessions and you go out there and it's you and your wife for the week, and she's going and getting photos of everything. It's amazing. So definitely I challenge everybody. And if you're the non-hunter that came across this podcast, I think hopefully that Mike's passion and my passion for elk specifically, but all wildlife has come across. So what is next on the horizon for you, Mike?
Well, heading to Spain in the fall to do some research and write some articles about Spanish ibex conservation through hunting. They brought their ibex back from near extinction to incredible healthy populations just on the backs, again, of trophy hunters. And then next June of 2023, I head back to Africa. I'm going to go to South Africa and do a mixed mammal. Actually, it's going to be black wildebeest in the Eastern Cape, and their bushbuck there, and then also do bird hunting, upland bird hunting there, what they call upland bird hunting. And I'm going to write up some articles on that, just talking about a different, this is not a fenced area at all. The area that I'd hunted in South, and I have no problem with fenced areas, by the way, as long as they're managed well and large enough. But anyway, I'm going to be doing that. And then I go from there to Mozambique on that trip to write an update for Sports Afield on the cheetah reintroduction. There in Mozambique. I did one on the lion reintroduction for Sports Afield, and they would like one on the cheetah reintroduction, so I'm going to do that. So that's what I'm doing.
If you are going to South Africa, support those. Don't support any put and take ranches, right? Don't support any 500-acre hunting concessions. Go support the guys that have hectares and hectares and hectares, and like my Cape Buffalo. He was born, bred, grew up, and died on the same property, but he never knew there was a fence there. Yep,
that's right.
Go with a qualified guy.
Yeah, I mean, the area that I hunted when I went my very first trip, like yours, was a plains game trip, but I hunted mostly on the property. It was Wildcott Safaris, who I went with. My brother, I found them, and they have 100,000 acres. And I never saw a fence. So it's, that's a big chunk of land. And there's lots of properties like that like the one where you hunted, it's just their expansions, they're huge ranches is what they are. So
they make the Texas ranches they dwarf them. They make them look tiny.
Oh, tiny. Yep, absolutely.
But I'm glad you're out there, trumpeting the conservation horn and carrying on what your father kind of instilled in you, and it obviously has come through in this podcast. I am excited to read the book. If people want to get in contact with you, if you want to get the book, where do they go? How do they get after you?
Well, my own website is mikearnoldoutdoors.com, and that's just one word, no spaces. And if they do that, they'll get to the website that's just in general. But the book, the page where they can go and purchase the book is bringingbackthelions.com. And that's all together as well. No spaces. Bringingbackthelions.com. They type that into their web browser and it'll pop it up, and then they can purchase it right there.
And then is there any social medias?
Yes. The social media is Mike Arnold Facebook. So it's Mike Arnold Outdoors, and it's the Facebook is got it right here. It's Arnold Outdoor Rider. Actually, I'm sitting here. This is something that's interesting to me. There's a quote off of an Indiana Jones movie from Sean Connery. He says, "I wrote it down so I wouldn't have to remember it."
I'm getting closer to that. Have you ever walked into a room and forgot why you walked into said room?
I've done that. I do that a little bit. But anyway, so my Facebook is facebook.com/Arnold Outdoor Rider. And so if they do that, they'll get to my Facebook as well. But the Mike Arnold Outdoors, they can get there, and that's my website. And it's got the blogs on it, and it's got everything else. All of my reviews for firearms and equipment and things like that are on that Mike Arnold Outdoors. So,
all right, you guys, you heard it. He's got 150 other articles out there. He's got some rather, I won't say just a different topic book from this book, but this one I am excited to get and read. And I really want to say thanks for coming on the podcast. Listeners are going to enjoy it, and we couldn't have this without your time. So appreciate your time today.
Hey, thank you so much, David. This has been just a real blast. Thanks.
Mike, thanks for coming. Check out the book, Bringing Back the Lions, and, start supporting conservation at your own place.
Thanks again for listening to the Radcast Outdoors podcast. We hope that you've enjoyed the show. If so, please go to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening to this podcast and subscribe, share, and give us a 5-star rating, which really helps other people find the show. You can find all of our shows, recipes, giveaways, videos, and much more at radcastoutdoors.com. While you're there, please help support the show by purchasing a Radcast Outdoors shirt or hat. Please don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Instagram. We also have a Radcast community on Facebook called Radcast Nation, and we'd love for you to join in the conversation there. And of course, please help support our sponsors who make this show possible. Thank you again to PK Lures, Bow Spider, and High Mountain Seasonings. Until next time, get out there and enjoy the outdoors.